let's begin our panel discussion. So we will just set the stage.
For this panel discussion, and we have many questions from the floor. So please allow me to speak just only in Korean because we will have the accurate translation because I'm not a specialist in the eco-design industry. Thank you very much once again for your cooperation. 오늘 한 이후 에코디자인 포럼 정책 섹션 이제 패널 토론을 진행을 하겠습니다. 제가 또 이쪽의 전문가는 아니기 때문에 통역 수신기 이용해서 하도록 하겠고요.
So we have gathered some questions. So we have some individual questions for each panelist. We have Mr. Pierre Ang Lee with us. I'm sure that there are a lot of questions for him. So first of all, before we start our panel discussion, I already introduced to him about him. Yes.
Participation before we start the panel. Please introduce yourself. I know I introduced a lot of you to our participants, but please say hello once again.
Yes, so good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Pierre-Henri from the European Commission. I'm part of the Department on Environment, but working together with the departments on industry and on energy on this legislation on eco-design for sustainable products.
Thank you very much. We'd like to pass around the microphone. 계속해서 좀 소개 좀 부탁드리겠습니다.
Good afternoon. I am Kim Dong-soo, Project Manager of KDPP Initiative at Kim & Chang. So I've been leading the research on the ESG and KDPP. That's why I am invited to this panel discussion.
Yes.
Yes, good afternoon. Mauro Scalia. I am Director of the Sustainable Businesses Department in Eurotex. We represent the whole European textile and apparel value chain, and we are engaged in the development of the Ecodesign regulation and the DPP as industry stakeholder.
Thank you very much for joining us today. 네.
Good afternoon. My name is Yugam Kim. If you go outside the exhibition, we have a booth from the Federation of Textile Industries in Korea. So we have the Standard and Sustainability Forum run by the Textile Cooperation Industry Federation of Korea. So I'm leading that standard and sustainability activities. Today, I would like to comment a little bit about the textile industry's standard and sustainability efforts. So, okay, I have some individual questions to Mr. Pierre Arny. So I would like to ask you some of the questions.
네,
So we had a lot of discussion on ESPR. So when developing the delegated acts for specific product groups under the ESP, is there any formal procedure through which the Korean government or industry can submit their input or participate in technical advisory bodies?
So there are actually many ways in which consultation take place, and therefore many opportunities for Korean government and industry to provide inputs. More informal ways throughout the preparatory studies where we have stakeholder meetings where all input and opinions are welcome. And then later on in the process, before we adopt rules, there are more formal way through the Ecodesign Forum and through the consultation of the World Trade Organization. So before adoption, where formal concerns and comments are collected.
그렇군요. 지금 그 공식적인 것뿐만 아니라 비공식적으로도
Not only official but unofficial means exist to share our opinions. So many from the Korean government and Korean businesses could share the insights. Please, Mr. Ani, please share your insights as well. That will be very helpful for Korean participants. And the question goes to Mr. Dong-soo Kim. The EU has been preparing for the introduction of the digital product passport for quite some time, whereas the Korean government and industries are still in the early stages. So, maybe in 2003. So, some people believe that we lack preparation. So, from your perspective as a participant to the Korean DPP project, what areas should Korean policymakers and industries prioritize most urgently? Also, what legal or institutional measures would be required to support these efforts ahead of the regulation's expected entry into force in 2027? Thank you so much for the question. Well, DPP scheme, if we rather than approaching it from the perspective of compliance, I think it could be an opportunity for Korean businesses to enhance their competitive advantage. So, legislation has to take place in advance because I have been in the past, DPP in Korea, for example, was mainly about waste, but this DPP regulation takes place in 2027. The recycled material usage will be the priority. So, Fair Trade Commission early this year announced a directive clearly demonstrating the use of sharing information from the suppliers. There's an indemnity to it, so that was clearly pointed out by the Fair Trade Commission. So that, but still there may be some compliance issues. So there are still a lot of challenges. So we need to revise some legal framework. But I want to say, but many Korean people say, in response to DPP regulation, we are latecomer. We didn't start early enough. Yes, I believe some are correct and some are not. Because, for example, the information database about SI's ecosystem, or that's I think one area we are very good at. Of course, we don't have much time. I think we can make efforts to catch up quickly because we didn't start early. I agreed with that, but I think we are very good at catching up. So I think we'll be able to respond to the regulation by 2027. Major sectors in Korea needs some sort of a lighthouse project for different sectors. So when there is a regulation for different sectors, we need a platform for companies to respond to that quickly enough. So EU has some good examples, some good use cases, and we saw a lot of use cases. So those could be some good reference for Korean government and the businesses to move forward with lighthouse projects for different industries. And one more thing, in Korea, many of the issues are not just for Korean market because DPP issues is global. It goes beyond the Korean market because we have tier 1, tier 2 suppliers not only in Korea. We have the Eastern European companies and the Southeast Asian companies. So we have to share information and data among those suppliers. So building data governance within Korea is not enough. Therefore, we need to find ways to work with partners overseas. By working with them, we have to implement a data governance, data sovereignty, and I think that's a very good start. And these kind of projects is not just for Korea because in EU the same challenges exist because EU businesses when EU requests information to a company, it's impossible to provide information from just one market. Many suppliers exist in other countries and other markets. So building an ecosystem with those suppliers is a good starting point. Thank you.
대응
Thank you for the comment. I think there are many concerns that we are behind in this endeavor, but I think he also mentioned that there are some areas that we are advanced. So we should develop the platform that's specific to each sector, and we should also work together with other countries, and that we can benchmark those countries. And if that happens, I think we can get ready before these regulations enter into force. Thank you for your comment. Now I have a question for the Mr. Skyla. So I'm sure that you're all well aware of that. Textiles are listed as the second priority after the steel in the first ESPR working plan. So is Euratex participating in the related joint research committee JRC study? If so, can you please share the general directions or focus of the study?
감사합니다. I understand the question. It's about the involvement of Euratech
Yeah.
and the direction. Indeed.
Yes,
So
please.
absolutely, we have started from the very beginning, the preparatory steps, which took place already in 2023, because we believe this eco-design regulation, it's absolutely important. It can match sustainability with competitiveness if done in the right way. And that's a breakthrough legislation. We started to work, first of all, on the scope, because we talk a lot about textiles, but this legislation and the next act is going to focus on garments, which is not to be taken for granted, but it's a part of the whole textile value chain. And textile is very complex, because yes, there will be DPP and eco-design also on steel, on battery, but the variety that we have in the garment industry is very huge, and the complexity of this value chain, which spans across continent, it's also very huge. So we really much engage frequently with JRC, also with the Commission, DG Environment, DG Grow, also with our counterpart, COFOTI, here in Korea. And we do see how the JRC is still collecting data. They are learning a lot. They're learning the complexity of this value chain. They have not drawn conclusions yet. What we do see, however, is that all the high number of potential performance requirements and information requirements, probably they're going to focus more on some specific one. Durability, for instance, might be one of those, which is relatively easier, has already measured with international standards, which is a great asset. Same for information requirements on substances of concern, on chemicals. And we welcome that, because we believe to be a successful exercise, a successful first time, the digital product passport should focus on a minimum set of information to begin with, and then gradually expand. So we work very much with the policymakers, also with other players, to elaborate on these points. And we're going to see probably the first insights of the direction towards the end of this year, we understand.
Thank you very much for your response. 고맙습니다. 3유에서 의류로
Thank you. You said the scope will be expanded not from textiles to the apparels, and because it can be expanded, so it has complexity to it. In order to and durability is a very important factor here. Thank you so much. Now let me move on to Mr. Yu-Gyum Kim. The first question for you is that, so I know that you have been sharing your insights and expertise in a number of seminars regarding the applicability and significance of DPP in the textile industry. So from your perspective, what are the most pressing challenges that textile companies must address in order to effectively adopt and utilize DPP? What direction do you consider taking building the system development? Well, textile industry has very complex supply chain. Acquiring data and implementing it and rendering it as a DPP, the process itself is very difficult and important. But the first challenge is for us is how the suppliers think about this issue, because DPP will bring about many changes to the textile industry. think about the post-fast fashion, because not only in Korea but the global textile industry was able to grow and expand because of fast fashion, and fast fashion is based on mass production. That was the paradigm that we know very well. However, well, fast fashion was highly successful, but once DPP comes into force, such achievement could be a minus point, negative point, because environmental regulation, the inventory, and waste disposal will be all covered under DPP. So fast fashion will find it very hard to exist in this new paradigm. Therefore, I think the the industry format and the practice has to change. We have to pursue rebirth, I would say, to be in this new era. So therefore, I think suppliers will have to change how they perceive this new change. I think, secondly, according to DPP regulation, how can we acquire data and how can we collect that and render it as a DPP, data transfer, how data will be implemented. We have a lot of discussion. However, acquiring data, the level of data that we need, how to manage and how to check and verify that data. I think we don't have a lot of discussion on that. Therefore, these kind of topics should be discussed with experts. Eurotex is, I think, could be a good partner to many of the Korean companies because they could learn a lot from Eurotex as well. Thank you. So, thank you for your advice to the Korean suppliers and those in the textile industry. So, we are doing very well in terms of time management. So let's move on to the second question.
질문 드리겠습니다. ESPR
So I have the second question. The horizontal measures was mentioned as the highlights of the first ESPR working plan. Could you please explain how these measures are expected to apply across product groups and how they relate to the introduction of DPP?
Thank you. So the horizontal measures are a specific case under ESPR, so it's not the general approach for ESPR. It is applied where you have product sharing technical similarities, and in case these similarities enable the regulator to have the same parameters applying to very different products. We believe, for example, that repairability is a case where you have these similarities between products, for example, which are complex products, which use different parts, and where the durability of this product depends on the durability or robustness of these parts. And therefore, the time needed, for example, to change a part in a product, the availability of spare parts are key elements for the durability of the final product. In which case, you can ask for the information, you can require the availability of spare parts so as to ensure that the product can be repaired along its life cycle. So it's one example where the similarity of product means that you can regulate different products with the same approach, the same requirements. This won't be applied to all products, so in each case, when we adopt an act on a specific aspect, such as repairability, we will say very clearly to which product it applies, which are the parameters which are common, how they have to be calculated, presented, and this can be presented through product passport, or it can be presented through other means. So that will be decided on a case by case for each of these acts.
네, 고맙습니다. 수평적 조치에 대한
So he just gave us the definition of horizontal measures. I believe that if our companies have a proper understanding, then that will be very helpful. Now my question turned to the Mr. Kim.
From a long-term perspective, would it be possible for Korea's DPP system to be developed towards mutual recognition with that of EU, or even towards a system which allows Korean-made products to be automatically considered compliant for export to the EU? So, from MOTIE, they said that they are pursuing mutual recognition. What are your thoughts? Rather than to respond to DPP regulation, but what we want to do is to establish a circular economy. So not only EU, but Korea, I think we both have the same need, because for Korea to be compliant to EU DPP, we need to collaborate on that, and EU side needs to be compliant to the Korean DPP, because the EU companies also need data for the suppliers in Korea as well. So it's not just about Korea and EU. I think we have to have see a bigger picture of looking at all the suppliers. So in that sense, it's not only Korea, EU, it's Korea, China, Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, Mexico, and the US. All of the trade partners will have to accept this concept. I think that's only when we can truly achieve circular economy. So I think it's the way to go. However, how can we achieve that goal? We have several different options or steps. The first step would be, based on the Korean side guideline, based on USPR, we could build a Korean platform. We have a lot of discussions on that. So many of the presenters, Dr. Jo and Dr. Shin, shared your expertise and efforts during the presentation. So Korean side and effort will be, I think, more clear to see by the first half of next year. So I think after that we have two steps more. The mutual recognition step, just like your question. So mutual recognition would be the next step. So the coupled systems, the ecosystem could be there, but I think we have to understand what's our difference, what's our similarities, what can be recognized. I think we need to update our legislation, so that will be the mutual recognition period. And after that, the trade partners, when we agree on many aspects, I think we could reach the step of mutual authentication, moving on from recognition. We need to be able to look at the integrity of the data on both sides and have traceability and have the data sovereignty in both markets. But we also need to achieve a certain level of technological development to realize this. So if we go through these multiple steps successfully, I think all of these countries, Korea and EU as well, could achieve the true meaning of circular economy. I think, thank you so much for your comments. So it will be lessen the burden for the Korean businesses if mutual recognition and authentication can be achieved.
알고 계시겠습니다만 한국은 기능성 섬유, 친환경 섬유 분야에서 기술력을 좀 갖추고 있는 편입니다. 향후 EU 측이 한국과의 공동 기준 설정, 기술 인증, 상호 인정, 공동 파일럿 프로젝트를 통해서 협력할 수 있는 구체적인 영역이 있는지 좀 궁금합니다. 이런 질문이 들어와 있습니다. 답변 부탁드리겠습니다.
Yes, thank you. I understand the question is about in the Korea industry and high interest on high-tech and eco-friendly textile, how we can best collaborate, indeed. So the fact that Korean industry distinguishes itself for eco-friendly and high-quality products, it's good news for the Korean industry, because indeed the Ecodesign regulation aims at increase the bar of sustainability of products sold in the EU territory. So I fully agree with what my colleagues have said. If your company specializes in a business model on cheap, low-quality product, then you have to change everything. If you specialize in higher segment of product, then you are better off in terms of, you might not even have to change how your supply chain is structured, but you have to work maybe on information exchange. So that's already a good news in terms of what is your standard point, how you will comply with this legislation. Now, I heard before that Korea might have started late on DPP, but I hear the right questions are being discussed. For instance, compliance. We might have started very quickly in the EU, but we have the same question that we haven't answered yet. How do you demonstrate, for instance, that you have recycled content? That's a fundamental important question. If you don't solve this question, we cannot ask for recycled content legislation. So the discussion about the compliance check, the correctness of the information in the DPP, these are absolutely important and have to go through globally accepted standards. Once we settle these questions, and we have only a few months, I would say, to do that, then we can put the right requirements. So compliance check, it's a good point. Standard and mutual recognition of standard, these are all things we need to figure out working together, because indeed it is a global value chain. The last point on collaborative projects. Many hundreds of companies are making projects. What we now have to look at is how this project can talk to each other. That's the new frontier of the DPP projects. If a project is made by a brand with IT solution providers with only a few suppliers, this will work fine within its own network. But then when you need data on chemicals, which come from another company, another continent, that's the difficulty start. So we need to exchange information of our projects, respective pilots, and see how these pilots can talk to each other. I think that offers a lot of room of collaboration.
고맙습니다. 물론 당연히
Thank you for your answer. Of course, I think we should devise ways to collaborate in more concrete terms. I think thank you for your answer. Now, my question to Mr. Kim.
That EU intends to incorporate indicators such as recyclability, durability, and repairability into DPP for textile products. What kind of research or regulatory foundation do you believe is necessary for Korean textile companies to effectively quantify and standardize? Well, I think this question is deeply related to DPP. To use DPP for products, consumer products, I think we can define DPP as this: transparency of the process, carbon neutrality, traceability of the suppliers, product safety, and waste. And all this is a collection of these information and rendered as a DPP. It's like a whole package. So textile product DPP is not a goal, it's a means. So because all of the things the performance that's taking place in the supply chain has to be quantified, collect that information, and if we share that data with the final product, that data, even though it's the same clothing, same apparel, but because of this data, I think the value of that product can be very, very different. So durability, recyclability, repairability are the basic requirements of DPP. But beyond that, what should be the future direction? What are the additional requirements that will be added to this? We have to think about that. Up until now, the apparels have a very short life cycle, and there's a changing fashion trend quickly. I think that was the growth engine behind the fashion industry and textile industries, and that was our focus until now. However, durability, recyclability, and repairability was on the opposite side of the values that we pursued in the textile and apparel industry. So how do we combine these different ideas into one? To tackle this, I think the suppliers and the fashion brands that will be responsible for DPP will have to work together from the beginning to end. They have to set goals and targets from the beginning, from the sourcing to the end. Of course, data, more than the data itself, I think what really matters is the value of the product and what kind of product will be made by fashion brands. They have to have a clear guideline about that and how to evaluate and measure and quantify those different indicators. One being recyclability, durability, repairability. How can suppliers supply the materials that are compliant? I think that's where we should begin the discussion. DPP is what we see. DPP is like a container for different types of data. But in the future, when DPPs come into full force, and after a certain period, we will be able to compare different DPP data. So we will then know which product is a better product, which product will bring more benefits to the consumers. We will be able to discern that. So I think we have to understand that and build a framework in that respect. When we change the supply chain based on those values, I think it will be more efficient to develop DPP for textile products. Thank you, Mr. Kim. From the supply chain to the final product, the suppliers and the fashion brands will have to cooperate to achieve that goal. Thank you once again.
모두 마무리 짓겠고요. 이제
So we conclude these individual questions. We do have some common questions. So I'll give you this question. And the first question is about the DPP. I believe that the words the DPP and ESPR can be very overwhelming for our consumers and our Korean people. So given that, is there any ways that we can introduce so that the government can prioritize some efforts so that our people can feel that these words are not too overwhelming? My question goes to Mr. Ang Lee first.
Yes, well, I think it's a question in general on how you prepare for the implementation of regulations or the implementation of changes in an industry in general. Of course, it requires planning, it requires cooperation between actors, and we heard several times that changes require better collaboration in the supply chain and the establishment of the right means of exchanging data, for example, throughout the supply chain. And I think this is the best way to prepare for such changes. Then the requirement will come and will be known progressively. But already if there is this collaboration and the means of exchanging information, I think these requirements will be integrated more easily.
Right. I agree with your opinion. 준비하고 기획하고 그리고 정말
Prepare, plan, and
되고 그리고 좀 가까워질 수 있도록 함께하는 것이.
Yes, I think we fully agree with the Ang Lee's comments. So the same question goes to Mr. Kim.
just like Mr. Ang Lee said, my opinion is very similar. But I want to emphasize one point. When we talk about DPP, so the suppliers will have to first prepare the initial data, but at the same time, in order to achieve the goal that is circular economy, and we have to talk about global compliance and data independence, interoperability, all of those are very emphasized. But however, we do not talk enough about the consumer side. The market, when market mechanism is established, the consumer's behavior has to change accordingly. So large-scale investment will have to take place for a certain period of time. If we can reduce that time, if we make efforts to change the consumer behavior in a more prompt manner, I think we'll be more efficient and will achieve our goal in a timely manner. Thank you. So consumer behavior has to change, and we have to support that.
함께 여쭤볼까요? 같은 질문이 되겠습니다.
Same questions to my scholar.
Yes, thank you. I think from the policymakers, it's important to explain clearly how the progress to develop the DPP is happening, and they are doing this job. Because at this point, we see how some companies may even get confused, consumers get also confused what actually the DPP will be. I mean, if you go now in a shop in some cities in Europe, you will already find a QR code that you can scan and get information on the product. So people are already getting used to that. And if you speak, you're a textile company and you speak to an IT solution providers, that company might sell you what they call a DPP solution. Now, this is not the final DPP because the policymakers have not made that yet because we don't have procedures. But the word is already a buzzword, just like collaboration, right? So this creates also confusions, and especially for the small and medium-sized enterprises because they don't have the capacity to follow. So it's important to have clear communication. And then when we have the DPP contents available with the work also done by industry associations, stakeholders from Europe and from outside, this confusion will logically disappear because we have one way to communicate mandatory information. Perhaps we have also other information that can be optionally provided by business, but in the same way that we don't confuse the consumers. I mean, we already see DPP with 216 data points. Not everybody can do that. So we need to have clear communication. Where do we stand in the process? We need to do our homework as industry association, and hopefully this will be clarified in the next year. Hopefully.
네, 정책을 만들어 가시는 분들께서 굉장히 명확하게 설명을 하고 그리고
I understand that clear communication is important and we should continue to work together, and then that will help our consumers to address some confusion. So my question to Mr. Kim now.
DPP를 계속 말씀드리게 되는데
I talk about textile DPP continuously. Well, think this way. If we have textile product DPP in place, let's imagine. So all of you who are here in this hall, I think we will have 1,000 different textile DPPs just in this room. And everyone will be a DPP carrier because you will be wearing clothes that has DPP attached. When you take shower, you will because you have to use the towels, so that's also another textile DPP. So textile DPPs will be expanded. So it's something that we cannot avoid or move away from. So from as a consumer perspective, what kind of benefits can consumers enjoy from DPP implementation? You can get a lot of information, you can get a lot of data, but what kind of benefits can that generate? Of course, because we have thousands of DPPs, but consumers, I think, will not see the benefit right away. On the other hand, when DPP is implemented in the mid to long term, I think the price of the apparels is likely to increase, not just because of DPP, the data and information that will be contained in DPP, it will be clearly out there that will increase the price of the apparels. So if you buy a product with DPP, I think the benefits that consumers can enjoy will be the price. A clothes with DPP, I think, should have some sort of tax credit if possible, like EV subsidy. Think about that. If a clothes have DPP attached, the government may have to think about the ways to reduce the price. Only then the consumers will buy them. Only then fashion brands will be proactively implementing DPPs. So I think we have to think about ways to let the consumers welcome DPP. And I think direct benefit could be a price reduction. So not only in apparels and textiles, in other sectors, we have to think about what kind of benefits we can bring to the consumers. Thank you. Thank you for bringing up very important points here. So my second question is,
So my second question is, ESPR is considered to be now the policy, not only policy academic, but industry illustration. To implement it successfully, I think we need to find ways to incentivize companies. So what do you think, what kind of policy instruments that could support or accelerate this early movement or early adoption? My question first to Mr. Ang Lee. Can you take it? Thank you.
Yes, in terms of incentives, in ESPR you have several articles dealing with incentives. One is more specifically aimed at public procurement, and that can be one way to incentivize. Or as was said for the previous question, direct incentive, direct subsidize to product themselves. But I think the main interest for consumers, and I think the best incentive, is to have a more durable product and product that the consumer will enjoy using for a longer time. And for which they may save money because they don't need to buy the same product so often. So I think this should be the best incentive for consumers to go for sustainable product.
고맙습니다. 소비자
Thank you. Your answer was focused on the perspective of customers, our users. Like, and subsidy can be anything, another thing, and durability was also addressed. And my question to Mr. Kim.
대응할 수 있는 방안, 네, 유인책.
so my question is like incentive for the businesses. I think environment has to be ready. For example, if the exporting company, not just to EU but to another country, maybe should use a regulation as a condition for a contract that has to be complied with. I'm not talking about just to implement DPPs here. Our goal, ultimate goal, is circular economy. So we have to look at many different options for that. So not a short-term measure for DPPs only, but to achieve the goal of circular economy, businesses have to must be provided with platforms or measures to accept DPPs, or for example, EV subsidy is a good example. And renewable energy subsidy was a good measure to accelerate the adoption. So DPP, I don't think it should be a regulation. I think it should be regarded as support measure for the businesses, because if the companies, to help them naturally adopt DPPs, for example, through the government measures, think about all the things that we discussed today. What kind of data we collect, and what kind of technology standards are needed, and what kind of mutual recognition is needed. All of this is just the approach from the regulation side. However, for a company to export the product, they have to do things naturally. So because no company wants to be welcome a new regulation, but I think things should work out naturally. For example, if there's a new for companies to adopt DPP, maybe large-scale SIs have to be involved. So for IT industries to have to be welcome to these measures, and also remanufacturing and reuse, recycle, remanufacturing companies we need to see more of those companies. Only then we will see a meaningful change. So how can we support these businesses? And just like Mr. Kim just mentioned, circular economy for textile industries will eventually raise the price of the apparels. Without tax credit, the companies will not be able to implement this new DPP. So we need to build a new market. So industry support policies should be developed by the government. Only then, I think we will be able to see meaningful change. So DPP should not be seen as a regulation. It's a measure to, it's a growth engine behind the business. I think we should look at it that way. So you said we have to look at from a different side to see DPP not as a regulation, but is a means to achieve circular economy. So thank you for your insight.
께서는 어떻게 생각하시는지 모르겠습니다. DPP에
So my question to Mr. Scalia, how to incentivize enterprises?
You. Well, technically speaking, if you will sell products, garments in the EU, you don't really need incentives because you have no choice. You have to provide the DPP and you have to comply with performance requirements, period. Otherwise, your product will be illegal. In other world regions, that could be interesting to see what kind of incentives there will be. But now, in the EU and maybe elsewhere, I think the best incentives that can be there, it's a effective and good market surveillance system, also fueled by DPP. I'll give you an example. In the EU and UK, on average, there are 28 billion of garments being imported and exported. 80% is imported. Now, 0.00003 is checked for compliance with chemicals. That means there is not an effective market surveillance system, and it's objectively impossible to do so. More requirements will come. If we have a good system to ensure market surveillance, then that's an incentive. Because I know if I invest in sustainability, and I know my competitors or other companies don't do that, then they will be caught, and free riders will be stopped. I think that's the best incentives. 2 small points. You can incentivize the requirements. For instance, in case of traceability, there is a way to incentivize the data gathering in the value chain. I like very much what was said in the previous presentation. There is no good traceability in the textile value chain. If that works, if that is simplified, it is less expensive for SME to exchange data, that's a facilitation, it's a huge one. Last point, recycled content is very difficult. If we want to incentivize and facilitate, we have way, for instance, with EPR subsidies to support the covering the higher cost. VAT is also a good one, but in Europe it's more difficult. Perhaps in Korea you have better chances. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you very much. 고맙습니다.
Mr. Kim? Just like many people said, there are many different ways to incentivize tax credit, low interest loan. I think financial support will be the biggest incentive. However, before accepting those incentives, businesses need to change. Businesses need to change to transition to DPP and circular economy, and resource and money is needed. So if we target just the EU market, everything is clear. Every timeline is out there. There are goals to that. However, the problem is in Korea. Same industry, same market, but in Korea, is DPP necessary here? When will we do it? Should we do it? Because there are a lot of uncertainties. Uncertainties cause businesses to fail to make prompt judgments. So how can we use these incentives to build a competitive advantage? Well, it's not clear for them. You have to have a clear certainty for the businesses to make investments and change. And to do that, the government, relevant government agencies must develop their programs and have a big picture around it to provide more certainty. For example, if a timeline is we will implement DPP in Korea in 5 years, of course there could be slight adjustments to the schedule. However, that kind of plan or timeline has to be out there for companies to change. Because I'm saying this because doing business the business model have to be very different from the previous paradigm. To do that, a lot of money, resources, people are needed to change. So higher certainty, I think, will be enticing for the businesses to change. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Because in the interest of time, I will maybe accept about 1 to 2 questions from the floor. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. We will deliver the microphone to you. Please raise your hand once again.
Thank you for all this productive panel discussion. I have 2 questions. So, referring to these EU use cases, I'd like to find an answer. DPP encompasses a variety of data points in terms of data batteries, 90 data points, and there is some general information, but there are some confidential information, and some information requires validation. And for companies who are working here in Korea who are exporting, then these companies, when they submit this data to EU, how these data can be checked in terms of conformity or validation. So my question is exactly how this data is to be validated. Because especially for the countries that the data points are coming from outside of EU, is there any different framework or different act will be considered, or do you have any experiences that we can refer to? My second question is, I think Korea is working well, relatively speaking, so that we can create a TPP and ecosystem. If that happens, I think if we have this data space here in the EU and in Korea, if we can consider mutual recognition, can you please share what kind of POC level, POC subject that requires ahead of these mutual recognitions? Thank you.
첫 번째 질문 EU 측에서 답변을 좀.
So I'd like to get the answer from the EU. How, when our Korean companies send the data, then how these data can be validated? I'd like to get an answer from Mr. Ang Lee. Thank you.
Yeah, so each time an information will be required, whether in the DPP or outside, there is always the means of verification, which is defined together with it. It can be verification on the product itself, so depending on the parameter, if it can be tested, for example, on the product, then the market surveillance authorities will test a sampling of product and will require manufacturers to have themselves the same parameter tested before being put on the market. So that's one way. If it cannot be tested on the product itself, then the questions of certification and the cascade of certificates may also be envisaged and required for these parameters. So it depends, in fact, on the parameters or the data entries that are required for the DPP.
고맙습니다. 혹시 첨언하실 분 계실까요?
Anything to add? Anyone?
Yes, please. We'll pass over the mic.
Sorry for interrupting,
No, it's okay.
because there is a project ongoing exactly for the testing for the batteries. From two perspectives, one is from the content, but as well from the system perspective. Yeah? So this is currently running, just started in April this year. So this project will define some constraints how to test data and system in order to be compliant with the entire regulation at least.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your sincere response. So we just open the floor. If you have any questions or opinions, please raise your hand. 고맙습니다. 이렇게 또 답변을 주셨고. 그러면 두 번째 질문 주신
For the second question, so the mutual recognition, so pre-approval of before the mutual recognition. I think that was a second question from the audience. If you remember, anyone care to answer?
Yeah, so in terms of mutual recognition, first, as was said already, I think by my neighbor, before going to mutual recognition, you need to assess very closely what are the requirements in each side, if the requirements are compatible, are on the same parameters, how they are calculated, verified in each side, and what could be the object of this mutual recognition. And once you have this technical work done, then the means of negotiating mutual recognition exists through the free trade agreements. So the framework exists, but the technical work has to be done and be done correctly in order to go to them.
제가 좀 더 보태면
I would like to add one point. So legal framework in Korea is very different. For example, think about the waste categorization. We have completely different criteria and legal framework in Korea, in EU. But to pursue mutual recognition based on that difference, it's impossible because our legal framework is decoupled. That's where we have to start. However, for an exporting company, it's a product made here and sent to there. You have to satisfy or comply the local legal framework from the design until the end of the waste disposal. The local laws will be applied to this product. However, we have all of these different products in decoupled markets. Maybe POC projects, if there POC projects will be good opportunities for us to recognize the differences. So mutually, we will understand our differences. That could be a starting point. As just like I said earlier, mutual. For example, if there is a legal framework and system in Korea and recycled materials ratio is almost same or almost similar to that level of EU, I think that's the first goal, and we can move on from there. Maybe the auditors will be trained, we will train them, and maybe in the end, mutual recognition and even more mutual authentication will be possible. Authentication will be the final step. And to do that, we need a lot of experience and a lot of practice, and data integrity has to be verified. We have to have that as a premise to achieve mutual recognition as well as mutual authentication.
Go back to the first question. I think it's a very, very valid point, and it's still an open question. I fully agree. Pierre already explained that testing is an avenue. But in some cases, you cannot test, for instance, the presence of recycled content. It cannot be tested with legal certainty. The business use practices like chain of custody, so you trace back information in the value chain. And so we need a system of data exchange which is safe, which avoids alteration in the process. So all the data transfer in the traceability system, which also lends to the DPP, has to be verifiable, has to be sure. So that's partially also an IT question, but it's still an open question because we have seen, so for instance, in some member states in France, they have the concept of bonuses if you use recycled content, but they have not figured out how to legally ensure the verification, and that has been undermining very much the use. So the whole point is, in principle, we have solution. Testing is one, chain of custody is the other one, but we need to find a robust way how to ensure that the information passing the value chain will be verifiable and will be tracked back to the source. As today, we are still not there.
Thank you very much for your answer. 네, 시간이 좀 많이 지났는데
Well, in the interest of time, but we have one person who has to ask this question, so we will entertain just one more because we are running out of time. So I want to ask just one question. So eco-design regulation. Well, eco-design, when we talk about eco-design, design is the design process. So we have to comply with the regulation from the design phase. Today's discussion was focused on DPP. However, the eco-design regulation for different products, I think what's happening in EU, I want to know more about that because reusability, recyclability. We're talking about ability, whether it is possible to reuse, whether it is possible to repair. Those are very future aspect of the product. Rather than focusing on the manufacturing of the product, how to discard that product when after its life cycle has ended, how can we recycle them, how can we reuse them? Because the EU countries, I don't think all of those countries have very homogeneous recycling framework in those countries. Even though those are EU countries, they might have different systems. But how can you have a singular framework for example, recycling and reusing? How do you harmonize different environment and opinions? What's your priority in harmonizing these differences among European countries? So in circular economy, discarding waste is very important part. So how those aspects are being discussed in the EU. So maybe the panelists could answer to that question.
So you're fully right that indeed there are important differences between EU member states, including on recycling, and recycling capacities are not the same. Precisely within the EU, what is the same is product regulations. So when a product is regulated at EU level, this regulation applies throughout the EU and within each member state. So it's a way to harmonize the system, but through the product requirements. Which means that indeed, for example, when we go to recycled content, the requirement will be the same, but the recycled material will not be available in the same way or will not necessarily follow the same process. And that's where indeed the requirements on the materials, quality requirements and verification of this quality are important aspects and need to be taken into account in the requirement as well.
Maybe I can try to complement on two very interesting aspects that you raise. Reusability, for instance. There could be different ways, and I think the benefit of this legislation is that it will harmonize. What do we mean by that? We think that higher quality is already the first condition for reusability. To use something again and again, it has to be durable, and that's something you can measure. Also, you need perhaps good instruction to care and maintenance of the product. So if you inform the consumer properly on how to treat properly a product, that also can increase the lifetime. So these are some ideas, some of the proposal of Euratex as well. There could be others, but this law will clarify that. Recyclability, I think it's a tricky one, because we see how technology is evolving very, very fast. So what is maybe not recyclable today, it can be recycled in 6 months or 1 year if you have the right condition. So that perhaps it's something more difficult to freeze in legislation, because legislation is slower than technology, or depends by the point of view. So I think the good thing is that this legislation will set the same criteria across the whole EU member states, and hopefully it can also inspire other world regions in going the same direction.
고맙습니다. 네.
Thank you. So thank you to the panelists for sharing your insights until this very end. Of course, we needed more time to discuss further. However, I think it was a very productive session for all of us. Please give the full panelists a big round of applause once again.